I always say that Shazam should not have existed, right? Because the chance of inventing the algorithm was 1%. The chance of building the database was 1%. The chance of building the cluster to operate on was 1%. For the company to exist, it compounds. So the chance was 0.0001%. Yeah. But again, no risk, no reward.
Welcome to 30 Years in 30 Minutes, the podcast that distills decades of wisdom and success into bite-sized, inspiring conversations. My name is Michael Oved, the host of the podcast. Along with Terrence Gable, I sit down with the world's most accomplished individuals and hear their stories of grit and determination. How did they rise to the top? What is the key to their success? How did they overcome the obstacles that they faced along the way? You will learn all that and more on 30 Years in 30 Minutes. Philip Inghelbrecht is the founder of Shazam, an application that can identify music based on a short sample played using the microphone in the device, which was later acquired by Apple for $400 million. After his time at Shazam, Philip was on the founding team and became the president of TrueCar, a pricing and digital retailing website for new and used car buyers, which later went public. Philip is now the CEO of Tatari, a TV advertising company, and the executive chairman of Boomerang, a technology company that reconnects people with their lost items. Philip, thank you again for joining us today.
It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Philip, your parents were business owners. How did that shape your upbringing, and how did that get you interested in entrepreneurship?
So, look, I came from a background which wasn't wealth, right? And so my parents built themselves what they had. And in many ways, they taught me the importance of making my own money, right? Because if you make your own money, then it kind of gives you a certain level of independence. And so, Michael, I would do anything. I think my first paid job was selling Christmas trees. And I truly enjoyed charging my dad for that, or surcharging him. But I've cleaned houses. I have waited tables. Nothing was too much or above me. And as I said, even as a kind of a teenager, a 14 or 15-year-old teenager, I had money. And it's strange to say, but it wasn't about the money, but it was about that independence. I could do whatever I wanted to do because I had the means to do so. I loved motorbikes. I had so many motorbikes. I would switch motorbikes every single month. And even my parents couldn't stop me because I earned that money myself. I also do admire my mom. She wouldn't care much about, people with fancy degrees and stuff like that. She always would tell me in a quiet way, well, why don't you just start your own company? And it didn't have to be anything big, but she always felt that being your own boss was the way to go. And so only later in life I realized this, but that doesn't mean I can't appreciate it.
And how did you develop that work ethic that you spoke about? How did you develop that hustle that you developed from a young age? What did you do?
It's a hard one, right? It's a good question. Actually, yesterday I met a family and they were picking up some furniture from my place, and the young boy that came along, I think he was 14. He just will not help his parents. And instead, it actually made me wonder, is that innate, right? Is that something that can be learned? I don't know. I like to think it is. Like with many things in life, maybe there's kind of a virtuous circle, right? Because if you work hard, you get results, right? In my case, you get money, independence, freedom, and stuff like that. Hard to explain. But how about this? If it's not into you or not in you, I encourage anybody who listens to try and learn the positive effect.
So is that what you would recommend to other people to do when they're younger in high school and college to work so that way they can earn some money and in turn gain independence?
Yeah, I would. And of course, it's more than money and the independence, right? So I'll give you a quick example. When I moved from Europe to the States in 98, so I moved to Berkeley to do my MBA. And again, right, I had to pay myself through my graduate degree. And then I learned that I could offer consulting, right? And just like this is during the dot-com boom, and lots of companies were looking for MBA students to help them with consulting. at the same time, in a selfish way, I wanted to reinvent my resume from an investment banker to kind of more a Silicon Valley type of person. And so I would combine both, and I would sell consulting projects to these companies. And so it was double whammy because I made some money, could pay for my studies and the like, but I learned about how the Silicon Valley operates. I could also kind of, change my resume. And then I took it a whole step up from there, Michael. Then I realized, oh, well, that's interesting. So what if I sell projects and then farm them back down to my fellow students? And so it wasn't long before literally I was running a team of 10, 15 students, all doing consulting work for me, which I then sold to other companies. And so it was more than the money, right? You can see I changed my resume. I learned, so many good things came from it. And so, yeah, I would just generally recommend that.
I mean, that's pretty hard while you're in school, while you're learning to also work in some sort of business outside of that. What advice do you give, or would you give, to people who want to kind of follow in your footsteps and start working while they're in school?
Gosh, I guess it also depends on what degree you're in and what you're studying. You guys are an undergrad, correct, Michael?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
That's probably a little harder, right? If you do a graduate degree in MBA, it's probably more about the things on the side that you do, the network that you build, rather than the degrees and the studies. So everything, nothing is positive, negative, black or white. Yeah, there's always kind of like a nuance to it. So obviously, if you do go to school, if you're kind of a student and you're listening to this, don't throw away your studies, because you pay a lot for it, or your parents do, and so see it through. We only hear about the success stories of people who didn't make it through college to only become famous billionaires. The reason we hear them is because there's only a handful of them. So that is not the natural path.
Now, you mentioned before that you went into banking after you graduated college and before you went into entrepreneurship. Would you recommend to somebody who thinks that they want to be a founder to first get some years of experience working for somebody else? Or do you wish that you founded a company or founded Shazam right out of school?
So I don't think there's kind of like a direct path or a right or a wrong. I fundamentally believe that it's more important that you can figure out something that not only you like, but above anything that you're good at. Because if you're good at something, then you're going to achieve results, and it's going to make you feel good, right? And you're just going to get better, and it's going to build your confidence, and you're going to radiate it. And so maybe focus less on like, do I work for a company versus do I start my own company? Just make sure that you start with something that allows you to figure out what you're really good at. So in my case, right, let's forget about the fluff top. In my case, I was really enamored by all things investment banking and trading, and at the time derivative products, which is kind of new in the financial world. And so that's what I set my eyes on. And so within 2 or 3 years, I was trading fixed income derivatives. But guess what? I was not good at it. I learned that I like compared to my peers in the office, I was mediocre at best. And then you lose confidence, and actually kind of becomes kind of like a vicious cycle. It was only when I started my own company, in this case Shazam, or actually some of these like projects that I mentioned earlier, that I realized what I was really good at, and I truly enjoyed it. So try to find out for yourself first. Starting at a big company is not bad, right? Because there's a lot of things you can learn.
And do you think that the only way to find out what you're good at is by trial and error, like you did?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Sometimes I always say you have to live the trenches a little bit, right? And so you can think, analyze a lot, but ultimately it's only by doing so that you'll figure it out. So let's extend that a little bit into starting companies or running companies. Like, it is my kind of fundamental belief or philosophy is that you might have an idea for a company or even a vision, but if you then kind of jump 5 years forward, you're probably only going to execute on 20% of that original thought or vision. The other 80% are the things that you're going to figure out and learn as you, again, same English, live the trenches, because you're going to see uh, um, uh, weird things or inconsistencies or outright stupid stuff in a certain industry where you're like, well, I can fix this. And therein lies the opportunity, right? And so back to your question, yeah, just trial by error, whatever you want to call it. Sure.
Yeah. Now, in the past, you've said, and I quote, "Be reckless, especially if you're young. You have to be willing to take risks. If your plan fails, then you have time to recover and figure something else. A solid base is always very important." Can you elaborate on that and, I guess, walk us through how you founded Shazam with that in mind?
Yeah. Well, I like to think that I had that already in mind when I started Shazam, right? Ignorance is bliss. Let's be truthful about this. But it is true that if now, after 20, 30 years, I look back at my career and I look at all the jobs or the job opportunities that I've had, the biggest reward, not just financially, but personally, emotionally, recognition, all that kind of stuff, has always been associated with the bigger risk that I took, right? So I did work at Google in the fairly early days. I joined 2004-ish. I was like person number 35 at YouTube. And guess what? I mean, obviously I look back at it with great pride and satisfaction, but financially, by the way, that was probably the smallest of all the other things that I've done. It's no arrogance. It's just, just kind of an observation. And so the younger you are, the smaller your footprint is, right? Chances are that you don't have a girl or boyfriend or a partner. You definitely won't have kids. You may not have a car, a dog, a mortgage. And so if you fail, which is highly likely, well, the cost and the damage is so much smaller. You can just kind of quietly pick yourself up again and go. So yeah, when you're young, go crazy. I mean, there is no better English. Yeah, and that's what I love about America. I think America is incredibly forgiving, encouraging, places more value on the learnings of the failure than the failure itself. And so hopefully that's changing in Europe. I'm not sure, but yeah.
So walk us through Shazam. How'd you come up with the idea for it? How did you found it? What did you do in the beginning to make it actually happen?
Yeah, gosh, how much time do we have? But so this is, so 98, I decided to go to business school in Berkeley and quickly realized that, right, there was a dot-com boom, that I too want to be part of this. And I too wanted to start a company. Now, I wasn't sure which company. And one of my classmates, his name is Chris Barton, had the same idea and philosophy. And so Chris and I were not only great friends, but we were also made a decision to become co-founders. We just didn't know the idea. And we had loads of ideas, some of them absolutely silly, crazy, bad, some of them actually good. And in many ways, I have regrets not seeing them through. But the Shazam idea was Chris's, right? And it came about from personal experience. You hear a song, you don't know what it is, especially back in the day, because the only music you listen to was typically on FM radio, right? Or something like that. And so I liked it. It was something that I can kind of identify myself with, and off we went. Now, again, you've talked about risk, talking about a little bit of ignorance, which is healthy, right? When you start something new, we actually didn't realize how difficult Shazam was. But music recognition did exist in the late 90s, but it was nowhere to the scale of what Shazam does, right? Maybe you could recognize one clean song out of a database of 200 tracks, right? Shazam had to solve the equation of recognizing a song in a very noisy environment out of a database with 30, 50, 100 million tracks, and do so in milliseconds. And so we literally had to invent this. And so, yeah, look, typically technologies are invented and then a market application evolves from there. We saw a market application and went ass backwards and said, like, no, let's go invent the technology. with hindsight, probably not the smartest thing, but talking about taking risks was the best ever. It wasn't the only piece. There were so many other moving components around Shazam that were probably a little ridiculous, right? Building a database of digital music that did not exist in the late 90s. There was Napster, but that was a kind of a peer-to-peer network. So we had to build the largest database of digital music just like that. And that's a company in its own right, and we did. Funny stories about that. We would literally rip over 100,000 CDs. If the listeners know young listeners know what ripping a CD is, right? You put it into a computer and you let the computer extract the digital bits and bytes. So many pieces around Shazam were just really unique. And in that, I think I kind of answered your question.
Yeah, you certainly did. I mean, but how'd you come up with the idea for actually creating a software, creating a company that
it's personal experience, right? And I think most companies these days start from personal experiences, right? So Shazam is like, well, I hear music, I like music, I don't know what it is. Or actually, I'll give you an even more simple example. Let's say that I do know all the music. You walk into a Virgin Megastore back in the day, right? And you literally have 10,000 CDs on sale and you had some pocket money so you could buy it on CD and you're like, oh, what am I going to buy? You couldn't remember anymore. What are you going to buy? And so we use Shazam, you can build your purchase list, right? And so personal experiences. And if we look at some of the other companies, TrueCar, right, which is an information service for cars, that too is very personal, right? Like, tell me, like, nobody likes going to a dealership and negotiate the price of a car. I mean, we're trained that you're likely going to get stitched in the process, right? And so anything that can help you with that is a personal experience, right? Tatari is the same thing. When we then did TV advertising at TrueCar, we quickly learned that, well, gosh, there's a lot of things that are done incorrectly here in this industry. We can fix this. And so Boomerang is possibly an even more straightforward example. Don't answer the question, Michael, but have you ever lost anything? Of course you have, right? Of course you have. Find me a person who's never lost anything. And it's remarkable how difficult it is to retrieve your belongings. Lose something on an airline today. Good luck getting it back. Try to call United. If you get through and you get somebody who answers that call and tells you where the item is, I will not believe you, right? And so clearly we need technology to solve these most obvious shortcomings as well as problems in the world, personal experiences. Yeah.
Wow. And then once you actually have that idea, how'd you come up with the name for Shazam?
Shazam. Well, actually, I'm still not I think I'm warming up to the name after all those years.
You don't like the name Shazam?
Well, now I do, but back in the day, so Chris, who I mentioned, and myself, we were at school in the courtyard. And this was back in the day where if you had a company ID, you wouldn't tell anybody. You go stealth. And so, but we need to give the baby a name because, what do we talk about our project? And Chris was like, well, how about Shazam, which is a comic? And I was like, well, I don't care what name you want to give it now because we will change it. Oh gosh, and we spend money on brand consultants and loads of conversation on changing a name, and it never happened. Now, as I said, I'm warming up, right? Because if you look at the meaning of Shazam in a dictionary, it's actually cool. Like it will say something like, it will refer to something magic, something fast, something extraordinary, unexpected. And for many people who use Shazam for the first time, that's exactly actually what it feels like. So I'm okay with the name now.
I was talking with my brother-in-law, and my brother-in-law actually told me that he was wondering if the name Shazam came from the superhero. Did you have that in mind when you came up with the name?
No, not at all. As I said, it was just kind of like, I think Chris had just read a comic book or something like that on the superheroes. Like, how about Shazam? We're like, okay, great, right? But we didn't have the insight of what Shazam really meant. If anything, like, gosh, it also caused some problems. We were an English company, and back in the day, if you had an English company, your domain name would be not Shazam.com, but Shazam.co.uk. Now, it turned out back in 2000, Shazam.co.uk was owned by a London cabbie who was selling condoms online. Imagine the consternation with investors that we pitch. The first thing they do is like, oh, let me look up Shazam.co.uk. And like, is this a joke? Right? Then we had to buy Shazam.com. I paid $10,000 for it. I still remember I negotiated with a very litigious Louisiana lawyer, but that happened. But then also realized much later why he was so willing to sell it. Because as soon as we launched the service Shazam, DC Comics, which was then acquired by Warner, reached out and said like, hey, trademark infringement.
Wow.
Now, there's a little fun tale to that. In the US, a trademark is established by kind of like common use, first use. In other parts of the world, namely Europe and Japan, it is established by first filing. And so Warner or DC Comics had never bothered to establish back then, this is all 20, 30 years ago, never established the trademark for Shazam in Europe or Japan. And so we wrote, they sent us a nasty gram, so we sent one back and we said, great, okay, let's talk, because you're infringing on our trademarks in Europe and Japan. That was the last thing we've ever heard.
Very smart, very smart. So you had the name, you had the idea, you had the website. And then from there, was it really just all about how hard can you work in creating that database of music?
Multiple pieces, right? So we had the database of music had to be built. The algorithm had to be invented and perfected, right? I think this through, Michael. Like once you have an algorithm, it's like a search algorithm. You need to run it on a cluster of computers. Nowadays, easy. AWS, Google Cloud. I mean, minutes. That didn't exist. When you came into the office, the Shazam office years ago, it was filled with computer parts and bolts and screws, right? We had to build these clusters ourselves. And then we had to do all the kind of the systems in which we kind of operated or integrated with all the mobile operators. So it was more than just building a database of digital music. You could almost argue like these four companies, each with a slim success of probability of success that had to be staged together, right? I always say that Shazam should not have existed, right? Because the chance of inventing the algorithm was 1%. The chance of building the database was 1%. The chance of building the cluster to operate on was 1%. For the company to exist, it compounds. So the chance was 0.0001%. Yeah. But again, no risk, no reward.
Exactly. And how'd you get the funding for it? Did you guys use the money that you made in your previous jobs, or did you?
No. We raised $1 million angel money. I think that was between June 2000 and June 2001, and a PowerPoint presentation. And then in July 2001-ish, sorry, I'm kind of timelines escape me now. We then raised another $7.5 million Series A. The amounts of structures were very different from how they are today, right? Well, thankfully, it's changing.
And what was the first song that you Shazammed?
Me personally,
yeah,
that is actually an interesting one. We still use this one in like not we. And sometimes if people ask me to talk about Shazam, sometimes I play that song as an example. It's a song called Never Ending Story by Limahl. And literally, this is, early 2000s. A database had like 300 songs in it. And so we were in London and we would try to kind of recreate Shazam, and then I was in a bar and they played that song. Totally random. And I knew it was in a database of 300. I'm like, will this work? And it did work. It was an incredible moment. The other one, I'll add this to it. Another song was played. A car passed by. It was near Hyde Park. A car passed by and they were playing the music in the car. And I forgot what song that was. I just decided to kind of like let my phone follow the car like that. I recognized it as well. And then I was like, wow, this works. Incredible.
Wow. And what do you think the first mistake that you made was in your, or what do you think the biggest mistake that you made was?
Gosh, so many. Financial discipline, money, revenue is oxygen to a company. If you run out, it's really tough. You could have the greatest idea. You could be at the cusp of inventing something or building something. But if you run out of money, then all chips are down, right? And so I definitely made that mistake. Somewhat related to that, and this is a little painful to say because I truly love all those people, but we don't think we always hired the A+ players. I mean, these people are great and nice and like they're friends, but yeah, maybe not the right people at that time. And so, right, if you look at the quality of a people and the success of the company, the correlation between that is one. And that's probably something I only learned much later in life. I think Google got that very right from the early days.
So how do you remedy those mistakes? How do you remedy the mistake of making sure that you're on top of your financials and that you're hiring the right people?
Shazam had its near-death moments, right, where we literally were out of money, where we had to take votes in terms of whether do we continue or not. We had our layoffs, massive layoffs. So yeah, I mean, like, it is what it is.
Is it inevitable?
I mean, look, as you get older and you learn those things, right? If I look at the way in which I run my companies today, I'm less prone to making those mistakes. Sure, I sometimes mishire. Sure, maybe I make a bad financial decision, but not to the tune that I did 30 years ago.
So it really comes with experience.
It does. It helps. Or, and I think this is kind of what we are trying to do with these videos, right? Surround yourself with people who can give you that experience. Even now, right? I'm 51. I'm part of YPO, Young Presence Organization. And if you haven't heard of it, you can look it up. But think of CEOs, presidents, or executive chairmen at companies. And they kind of build around the world, and they build small networks of peers with whom they can share their challenges, their problems, and help them solve together. So I still do that. And so if you're young, surround yourselves with, the right advisors. Join an organization like EO or YPO if you can.
Now, you left Shazam after around 4.5 years into the company, and you left before it was sold to Apple in 2018. Do you wish that you stayed, and why did you leave?
My decision to leave was entirely personal. I really, and I still do like Northern California, kind of the lifestyle. I had a network of friends here from school. I'm very outdoors. I like the climate. And so after 4 or 5 years London, I just this is not what I wanted to do. That combined with the fact that I don't care much, but the investors behind Shazam were very questionable, and I just did not want to be part of that, or at least on a day-to-day basis. So I made that decision to move to California. Actually, we're talking about risk. I had no job, I had no visa, I had nothing. It just things work out. No, of course, we never really left. Chris in particular, as founders, we shared a board seat, and Chris in particular took it upon him to be active at the board level, maybe with me a little bit in the background. And so it's kind of like a baby. You never abandon it, but I actually have no regrets of operationally leaving it, because at the same time, Michael, it opened so many other doors, right? I took new risks, and it opened so many opportunities. Change is good.
Yeah. Change is scary, but it's sometimes it's important. Sometimes that's important to take you to the next level.
Yeah. I think it's like, if you look back, I think you can ask, sometimes I ask people that question. If you look back at your whole life, are there truly decisions that you made that had, even if there were bad decisions at that time or not optimal decisions at that time, that over a longer arc of time that they were bad? Like, nothing positive came out of it. And it's really, they don't answer this question now, but think about it. That is seldom the case. Every decision, even as bad as it was at that moment, probably induced change that led to something else, which then became positive.
You're right. You're right. So now, based on all of your experiences, based on all of your successes and your failures, if you were speaking to a high school or college student right now, what would you tell them to best prepare them to be a successful founder?
I think we went through some of them, right? Take risks, work hard, right? Get a support network. Um, mm, Maybe I'll add one, right? Because I think there's a little bit of a misconception around this with people who say they want to start their own company. They always think they have to invent something, right? They always think they have to come up with something brand new, and a little bit like Shazam. That's a true invention. I'm going to be really clear about this. Inventing stuff and then bringing it to market, that is really, really difficult. Most ideas have already been thought of, right? And so being an entrepreneur, starting a company, it is okay to do something that already exists. By the way, that may already exist for 1,000 years. Just make sure it's 100 times better than how it's done today. That is a wonderful company, right? And if I look at Shazam, that was a true invention. And look, if you succeed and eventually gets there, it might take a while. Kudos to you. But those are the rare ones. I'll give you an example. Google. Tell me one thing that Google has truly invented. Not search, not Gmail. It was Hotmail. Gmail was just literally 100 times better than Hotmail. Not AdWords. That was Go. Maybe the self-driving car. Maybe that's a true Google invention. Right? And so that would be my piece of advice. Look around you. I actually have a little bit of obsessive behavior around this. Like as I go through life, it does. Right? I see things that just make no sense. I'm always like, that's a company, that's an idea. And so like maybe just start from there. It's an easy one.
Now the last part of the interview is our rapid fire questions. So I'll get started now. What are the top 5 names on your playlist?
Artist names?
Yep. Song names, artist names.
I would have to look. Unfortunately, my Spotify playlist is corrupted by my kids who will listen to Taylor Swift. My agony. I'm an EDM fan. I listen more to playlists, house music. Names like Jan Blomqvist, Paul Bremer, you name it, stuff like that.
What book do you recommend?
Oh, I don't read much. Actually, I love reading. I just don't have enough time. There's one book that I feel like I still maybe use unconsciously, and I forgot the name of it, but there's probably 100 of them. It's kind of like books that help you how to negotiate correctly, right? In a true win-win situation. Those have served me well. Another book that I have enjoyed and it leans into entrepreneurship is a book called Endurance, about a South Pole expedition that went completely awry. So that's a good book to read as well.
And what is your biggest regret?
Well, when I was in investment banking, at some point I decided to live in Luxembourg. And by the way, Luxembourg is a beautiful country.
It is beautiful.
But if you're 25 years old, that makes absolutely no sense. I was a big fish in a small pot. And I would have been much better off being a nobody in financial capital like London or New York.
And so that's your biggest regret, moving to Luxembourg as a...
Yeah, I know that sounds so negative, but yeah, it is, I guess. That's actually, remember how we just talked about, like, are there like decisions that you look back and it's like, tell me something that positive that came out of this later. I'm really scratching my head here. I can't come to it.
And what is a quote that you live by?
Do something every day that scares you. I tell this to my kids every day, post it every day. And it's very cute, right? Because they're not 12 and a half and almost 14. And when they were 4 years old, they'd be like, "Oh, Daddy, I jumped off a chair." I'd be like, "Oh, bravo, that's scary." But now as they get older, they'll be like, "Well, Dad, I was afraid of asking my teacher for help," right? They're kind of getting more into the emotional realm. And then, so like, I really like this one. Doing something that scares you every day doesn't have to be like jumping out of planes. It could be the most simple thing, the one thing that makes you uncomfortable that day. Do it. I'll give you an example. I had a person in my team, I had kind of like quick 1-1, no names. This morning, it was a he. And he asked me, okay, well, what's the most important thing that I can do to execute on the Tatari business plan for 24? And my answer was, from a technical point of view, it's autopilot. You've got to work on your people management skills. And I was kind of like, whoa, right? That was a tough conversation. It was scary for me to bring it up, but I know that that person got more of that answer than just not a business talk.
Yeah. Now, this last question we probably touched on a bit during the course of the interview, but what do you think has been the key to your success?
Work hard or work smart, get things done. I have an innate fear of failure. I'm very afraid to fail. And then maybe, some things like creativity, people management, but those really kind of came later in life.
Well, thank you so much, Philip, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you on. This interview was absolutely wonderful. I certainly learned a lot. I'm sure everyone watching and listening learned a lot as well. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for listening to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments if there's anyone else you want to hear from.